I looked at this question, how can trade unions win in Cameron's Britain, I thought, oh, well, no pressure there, nothing difficult, is it? Now, when I set my students difficult essay questions in my day job, I sort of explained to them that what we're marking is the ability to construct a reasonable argument, not necessarily to find the final and definitive solution. So I hope contributions will be taken in that spirit. But I'd like to offer 4 thoughts. I think we need to take up the economic arguments. I think we need to link the industrial and the social issues. I think we need to build the unions at the grassroots. And I think we need to contest union elections with a strategy that can win. So let me elaborate a little bit on those points. We need to take up the arguments about the economy. Now, there'll be debates among Keynesians and Marxist economics. There'll be those debates. But we need to have those arguments to challenge the argument that austerity is necessary, that the deficit has to be paid back rapidly, or that workers' living standards have to be sacrificed. If you look at what the PCS leadership is doing, I think one of the things they're doing right is read some of the pamphlets they're producing, like the one in defence of the welfare state, where they make the links between the economic issues and the issues affecting their members in terms of jobs, pay, pensions, conditions, and so on, and also the service that they're providing.
You need to put it close to your mouth.
It's working.
Is that better?
Yeah, right close to your
Right,
mouth.
sorry, right. So I was making the point about taking up the issues about the economy. I think we then need to be talking about how we link industrial and social issues. So education workers need to be talking about a better education, a real education for students, and talking about how they defend their jobs and pensions and conditions and so on, and take up problems like work intensification. These aren't separate issues. It's not like you have your educational policies here and your industrial policies over there. You need to explain the links. I mean, one of the things, for instance, we've done right, I think, in UCU Left, is we produced a journal. My colleague Jane Hardy, who might be here as the editor of it, called Another Education is Possible. But you know, that title has a resonance. People like that title. And then sometimes they like the journal when they buy it too, which is even better. But the point is that we're campaigning both on a vision of changing the services we work in, and we're campaigning around the trade union issues to do with our working conditions, our terms of employment.
Close to your mouth.
Right, sorry, I need to keep it closer to the mouth, okay? We obviously need to talk about how we build at the grassroots. And this is about campaigning and union recruitment tied in very much to campaigns around real issues that are affecting people like work intensification. We need to base ourselves on these core trade union issues and be showing that we campaign and build unions actively by taking up these issues. We don't build unions by waiting for a Labour government to come in 2015 and fix things for us. We build them by actually taking action now around the issues and showing members how they can address these issues. We need to be the best builders of the unions. We need to take up issues like union density. And we need to take up issues like membership participation in union ballots and union elections. Now, I know many of you are very pleased I got elected as Vice President in UCU. The less good news is only 11% of the members voted in that election. 89% of our members didn't engage with the process and didn't vote. Does that mean they think it doesn't matter? Well, it does actually matter who's Vice President, because they're one of the 4 people in the AG sector who will be involved in authorising ballots for industrial action or not. We need to explain to people why they need to be involved not only in building their branches locally, but in national union politics, because there are real choices which affect what people can do on the ground. So we need to take up those issues. And the last point I want to make is that the left does also need to contest and fight in union elections, and win them if we can. We need to campaign on the right sort of issues. We need to pick the issues carefully about the real issues that are facing people in the workplace. And we also need to campaign around a strategy that can win. And this is, I think, the last point I want to make, because I was in a session earlier this morning and we were talking about what happened after November the 30th in 2011. What happened? We had the great build-up to that action and then things fell apart. And what we have had subsequently have been the odd one-day strikes. Now, you don't build action by simply having a one-day strike every 6 months with nothing in between. We need to be putting forward far more viable strategies for industrial action, which may be rolling strike programs, combining strike action with non-strike sanctions. Or we need to present people with a coherent program of action, which actually looks like it's got a decent chance of winning. I think that's a really important point for the left to be campaigning on in the unions at the moment. So I'll stop at that point and hope we have plenty of time for discussion. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ian Hodson, who's from the Bakers Union.
Good morning. The good news is I was told I had to cut my presentation short, so I haven't got the slides and I haven't got the projector with me, so you'll be pleased about that. I'd just like to say, obviously when looking at the question, I thought, how do you address the question, how do you survive Cameron? It's been more like how we survived Thatcherism, and the fact of the matter is we have survived Thatcherism, we're still here. And sometimes we forget there's over 6.5 million people still in trade unions, and we're still there and we're still fighting. And what we've got to do is remember that is a collective strength. And there's a reason why the Labour Party is going through this process at the moment of attacking the trade unions. It's because it knows to stop the left from coming together, it has to stop it and neuter its voice. And that's what it's attempting to do. So if we recognise that the Labour Party recognises the importance of trade unions, we should make sure that we recognise the importance of trade unions, because we are an important asset and an important group of people to make sure that we can change this country for the better. And we don't have to go too far back to see what happened when trade unions had a major say in this country. There's a film out at the moment called The Spirit of 45, and those people who've seen it know it's an inspirational film. That came about not because of the political will, but because of trade unions forcing Labour leaders to make sure they adopted policies for the benefit of people and not just in the interest of big business. And we changed our country, and that was the trade unions that did that, along with other groups in our communities. And that's what I'd like to say is where we need to build from. It's the communities working with the trade unions. That's how we survived Cameron, and that's how we survived this neoliberal attack on our terms and conditions and on our employment rights. We work together in the communities and build our strength there. Because one of the things that I noticed when I became the president of our union was the lack in our training of how we organise for industrial action. How our training through the TUC was aimed at reaching partnership agreements rather than how we organise to make sure we get the best we can for our members. So one of the things that we've done as a trade union is redress that. We now teach shop stewards how you organise for industrial action, because that's key. Because one thing that bosses are scared of, especially in our industry, because we're private, there's not many private industry trade unions about, but we're one of them. And we ain't going to save the public sector either, because we're losing probably more jobs than you are. But I've got to say to you, if you don't stand up and fight, you don't stand up and organise, they walk all over you. So we've addressed that now. And one of the things that we've managed to demonstrate that gives confidence to people in our industry and confidence in our workplace is, a few years ago we had a bit of a dispute with a company called Burton's Foods. They said we was having a 1.5% pay increase. So what we decided to do was have a ballot. Well, in the run up to that ballot, we consistently had meetings with our members, and we also decided that we would engage with the people who live in the area around the factory, so we leafleted them. We used the strength through the trade union councils. We organised with the sister sites in the group, and we made sure we contacted the MP in the area. And we built a group of people that made sure they put pressure on that company. That company says, it doesn't matter what you do, our offer's 1.5%. So we went ahead, we organised, and that 1.5% became 6%. That's what happens when people come together and work together. And let me say, when we talk about trade unions and the role that they play in the community, and when we want to say, how does trade union make things better? I've got to say this to you. Trade unions make things better when they stand up against exploitative schemes such as workfare. That's how trade unions make things better. And they make things better by saying to people who are unemployed and being forced to take exploitative jobs, actually, we ain't going to allow that in our workplaces. And if they bring it into our workplaces, I'm proud to belong to a trade union that says, you bring workfare here, we'll mandate our membership and we'll ballot for industrial action, because that's what you do when they try and bring workfare into your workplace. You stand up and you say no, because people should have real experience of work, not be forced into forced labour. Because there is no difference between forced labour, sometimes referred to as slavery in workforce, It's exploitation, and we need to take that message to people. It isn't right, and you don't raise wages by cutting benefits. You raise wages by making sure employers pay people properly. And you also make sure that when it comes to tax, let's win the argument on tax. You shouldn't be cutting tax at a time of austerity when the poorest in our society are being attacked with the bedroom tax. You should be making sure that the people at the top pay their fair share. And in fact, they should have raised it. And not only should they have raised it, they should have brought in legislation that says, if you don't pay your tax in this country, you don't trade in this country. And if you don't pay your taxes, we're going to jail you. That's what they should have said. Obviously, I've only been given 7 minutes, so I've condensed it really short for you, and I'm pleased to say, and I'm pleased you're probably pleased to hear that. But I'd also like to say, I want to move on to this one final, because I belong to a trade union that supported the call for the general strike. And I'm proud of our trade union. Our General Secretary is just in the room, and he often speaks about the general strike and the position we take on that. And he's got some great jokes about it, but I can't remember because I went out last night. But I've got to say this, at the beginning of this month, our trade union, I think we're the first, our trade union decided that just because me and Ronnie believe it's right to have a general strike, it doesn't mean our members are. So we decided it was right to consult our members. We ain't going to use the postal ballot system because we don't believe that's democratic. We're having a workplace ballot. We're asking our members to support the call for a general strike, because I'll tell you what, that's how we win with this government. We bring them down, and we bring them down through a general strike, and that's what we should be doing. Every trade union should be following that point. Solidarity.
The next speaker is Sean Vernell. He's on the UCU National Executive and is the National Secretary of Unite the Resistance. He's also the author of this pamphlet, Don't Get Young in the Third Millennium.
I've tried not to. But it's showing. Partially, I'm the Joint National Secretary, James, the other one in the room as well. Really, I don't want to spend too much time on the issue of the Tories and how awful they are and how they're attacking people and so on. I think we all know that. I really want to get on very quickly on to answer the question, how can unions win in Cameron and Britain? And firstly, I think Ian just spoke about it really in relation to trade unions, because there is a debate, isn't there, within inside the left as well as more generally about trade unions, their role, organising unorganised workers, the precariat argument, the question about density, and I'll come back to that in a moment. All these arguments are real ones, and I think we need to explore those because it's a real debate on the left, it's a real debate within the right. In fact, a lot of debates on the left reflect very much what the right-wing trade union leaders say, and they've got very similar arguments to some of the ones I've been reading recently from the left, and I want to address one or two of those really, because I think it's pertinent to how we go forward. The first thing, I dare say trade unions. When you hear some people think that trade unions are somehow really much weaker. Clearly, 7 million, just under 7 million people are in trade unions in Britain today. It's around about a quarter of all trade unions. The high point of trade union density in this country was in 1979. You're talking about 13 million people in trade unions, roughly I think about 50% at the time. Clearly a big drop from there to then. Most of which is at the time the mass unemployment amongst the tax and the private sector explain a big chunk of where those trade union members went. It isn't the case that everybody left because they hated trade unions, didn't think they were worthwhile. Clearly there's sections of that, but that's not really the bulk of why people left trade. They were simply unpopular. Clearly when you look to where they're organised, trade unions, the public sector, 54-55% of workers, that's the biggest bulk of where trade unions are at this moment in time. Something like 14%, I think, in the private sector. Again, these aren't terrible figures. When you think like France, which has overall density of 14%, this is not the worst base in which to build from. I say this because when you're in a trade union, and my particular one at the moment, there's a big debate about we've got to grow because we grew. Yes, it's true, we grew around the pension dispute, but afterwards we then disappeared and we've lost 5,000 members. Therefore, we've got to worry about how we grow and so on. It's a real debate, and they're quite depressing, really, how sometimes people talk about these kinds of issues. So it is true, mainly in the public sector and the private sector, and the figures for what's known as the sort of precariat, or workers who are permanent, part-time contracts, and so all these figures. Out of about 13 million workers, 1.6 million workers are in temporary contracts, 8 million work part-time, and 4.2 million are self-employed. So it is a big chunk, and clearly with this recession compared to the 1980s one, part-time work, that's been a big impact inside, as opposed to simply mass unemployment, although clearly that's been part of it as well. But therefore, the argument was going to be followed, how do we get in those workers? How do we organise those workers in relation to trade unions? Now, it is again true. When you look back historically, when you think about the 1890s, the dockers, these were not people who were seen as organised workers. They were seen as like the precariat in that sense. They were unorganised workers and can become, in certain key moments of history, those unorganised workers can rush ahead of the more organised workers. I mean, in Germany in 1919, the Obleiter, it was called the shop stewards movement, also was an unorganised layer of people who moved very, very quickly and became organised. And that's, I think they have to understand, that's clearly part of that. But at the same time, when you have in my sector, in further education, casualisation is one of the biggest problems. In fact, there are more people casualised or want hourly paid contracts in the further education sector than in catering. Right, catering's number one, and we're number two in the sector. This is quite, something like 44% of people who work in further education on hourly paid contracts. This is enormous. In my college, it's 30% are on hourly paid contracts who do 60% of the teaching hours in the college. So you can see it plays a fundamental role in allowing the employers to push through all kinds of things. The question therefore, how do you organise those workers? Well, is it the hourly paid lecturers? Are they the ones more likely to take up the vanguard of the question? Very unlikely. I'll tell you for why, because you're vulnerable. Simple as that. If you're an hourly paid worker, you don't have the rights and so on and so on. And then you're more vulnerable. The key to organising these people, of course, is the employed workers, the full-time workers. They're the ones who have the security of contract and so on, and we're in an argument with those people to take up the fight on behalf of the hourly paid and vice versa. So, and it can be done. I mean, in many places, many workplaces, the density of union density in my workplace, out of that 30%, something like 50% of the hourly paid lecturers are in the union. So you can get involved in organising these kinds of things. So I think it is a big issue. There are many unions. I mean, Unite and others have tried to organise that at the community level, the unemployed, and so on. So clearly, the nature, the composition of the British working class has undoubtedly changed in terms of services and so compared to last 20. That is something not unusual. That is something which is continuous and ongoing and has been for many years. It isn't therefore, we shouldn't draw the conclusion, therefore, trade unions don't fit, don't work. We have to work out ways in which we relate to those changing situations. But I think we have to look at the key to success of doing so has to be where the most organised are in relation to that less organised sections of the working class. The second point is about, I mentioned just quickly, on the union density. I mean, it's really frustrating arguments and debates you get about this within our union and many others. It goes something like, there you go, well, you can't, struggle's not the key. Really, we've got to do more hard work, slogging out at the local level to recruit and organise people. And this is obviously very, very, very true. However, really the key to it, seems to me, isn't simply that. National action is the key to building unions. It's straightforward as that. When you listen to what Ian was describing, the kind of campaigns he involved, you will get more unions. Look at the figures, look at the graph. 1892, the graph comes 1892 all the way up to the present day. And what you see is the ups and downs of trade union membership are up and down with the level of class struggle. It's the struggle that builds the unions. When you talk about the 1990s, 1890s, when you talk about the period of 1919 to 1920, the most struggle should involve there. The early 1970s, when the workers' struggle arises, the union membership grows and the density and the involvement, therefore, of people also grow within it. So I think that's an important point. To finish, therefore, I think I was going to say one or two things about the nature of the struggle. I think we can leave that to later. But I think I do want to say something about what Unite Resistance is trying to do, really. And I think it's quite important we get it right here. Unite Resistance has organised a conference on October the 19th, called Organising to Win. The idea of this conference is precisely this. We know from the People's Assembly, they have called a National Day of Action on the 5th of November. Quite likely it's going to be strike action involving a number of unions around November, plus demonstrations and so on. So this conference is going to be quite unique. It is going to offer all sorts of activists in trade unions, and people are in trade unions, an opportunity to come together to participate in workshops led off by people at the cutting edge of the fight to austerity to organise. So organising the unorganised, that would be a workshop. How to organise a strike, how to use the media, how to organise solidarity inside your workshop. All sorts of key questions which some of us have done before, some of us haven't. So we can put together the experienced part of the movement with the less experienced part of the movement and share those common ideas so we can go forward. So hopefully people will participate in that and sign up afterwards. The final sentence really will go to this. You see, I do think politics is the key to all of this. When I think back how we in UCU have managed to be able to be central to part of the struggle because we understood the political nature of the tax and how we do so. Why UCU was at the forefront of these struggles isn't simply because we just had people at the top, it's because we understood the political nature of the tax on education. And that, in that sense, when we talk about organising, as Liz said, organising defence of our services, in defence of our contracts, in defence of our wages and conditions, we've always framed it in a wider concept in defence of our young people's education. And I think we do that right every time. When we fought over pensions, yes, we knew it was about our pensions, but actually we also knew, and as everybody else did, what drove that was the fight against austerity and the defence of our welfare state. That's what gave it that momentum. And that's the important lesson, it seems to me, in building unions and how unions can be successful against Cameron, is putting that at the forefront. The day we forget and try to cut off the users of our services, or whatever it might be, from the actual conditions of service, pay and so on, the day we will lose and the day they will win. You need to unite the wider frame of education, the wider frame of austerity, and that of conditions of service.
Okay, thank you. Deb Squin is an NUT member from St Helens, Merseyside NUT, and was recently on strike, the part of the North West Pensions and Pay, Election Day on strike. Okay.
Thanks. I also just want to point out that I am the Equalities Officer for St Helens, but I have absolutely no facilities time, and I am a full-time teacher in the classroom every day of the week. I'm not on any union facility time. Okay, this question, when I first saw it, the first 4 points that popped into my head was a couple of questions. First of all, what is it that we want to win? And secondly, what about the millions of working class people who are not in a union? I think a couple of those points have been touched on already. And the other two things that came in my head was know your enemy and know your history. So then I thought, right, I'm going to condense this down because otherwise I'm going to be here forever. So I'm going to try and touch on 3 main points. And the first one will be perspective since 2011. Then a little bit about the education unions and why we're sort of leading things at the moment. And then thirdly, sort of the most important bit really is how do we move forward now and how do we achieve our goal of bringing Cameron down and the Tory government. So starting with the recent perspective, November 2011 was obviously a massive, massive day. And for most of us on the left, it was seen as the start of a big, significant fight back. Okay, if you look at strike days over the last sort of 20, 30 years, 1980s, you were averaging 7 million a year. That was down on the 1970s, which was 13 million a year. In the 1990s and the 2000s, you averaged between 600,000 and 700,000 days of strike action a year. I mean, the drop is massive. We then picked it up in 2011. We had 1.4 million strike days. Last year, that dropped to 250,000. So you can see the up and down of the movement and what's been going on. And we won some minor concessions after November 2011, but I have to say the unwillingness of the main trade union leaders to take the struggle forward is a massive blow, and we cannot escape that. If we look at what's happened since 2011, we've seen further plans to privatise parts of the NHS. In my own region in the North West, there's been 2 massive campaigns. One was to save maternity units because they wanted to close them and centralise them in Manchester. Second one, which has just kicked off this week, they want to close the A&E departments at Trafford General Hospital. Trafford General Hospital is generally recognised as being the birthplace of the NHS. That fight has got to be political and economic. It's not enough to talk about the economics in that situation. We've also seen the attacks and privatisation plans on the Royal Mail, how timely, and further attacks, further sustained attacks on the public sector terms and conditions. If November 2011 had been the start of a significant fight back, we would not have seen such a number of attacks in the last 15-18 months from the Tories. and the attacks on trade union facility time. And the attacks on trade union facility time has a massive impact on the power of the unions, because any caseworker or any local officer knows that a lot of their facility time at the moment is taken up by casework because of the conditions that people are under at work, which means there's less time for building and campaigning within the union. And it's something that is happening across the country, but we have to sort of defend our facilities time, and we have to do it again in a political way. It's not enough to just say, well, we have the right for representation at work. That isn't the only role of the trade union movement, and we've got to take those political arguments when we're talking to people. And I would just say, November 2011, the last thing that I will say about that is that the public were on our side. We had the march in Liverpool, and the reception we got was fantastic. There was first-time strikers on that march who were worried to go into town on that march, and they were in tears when they saw the reception that we got from the general public. But I want to move on to my second point, which is about the education unions. Obviously, the pensions dispute was actually started by UCU. They took strike action on their own in March 2011, and that started the whole process for 2011. In June, we saw PCS, the NUT and the ATL take strike action, and then in November, over 30 unions took strike action. Then we went into conference season. The NUT went to conference at Easter 2012, and the left tried to move a motion, or an amendment to a motion, which would call for further days of national strike action, and it was voted down. The leadership did not want that motion to go through, to be passed. We won a third of the delegates on the conference floor. There is anger out there, but it was shut down by the leadership. We've obviously now gone into a historic agreement with the NASUWT, which started off being a work to rule, is now obviously escalating up to strike action. But let's look at this strike action. The strike action we're taking at the moment is primarily about performance-related pay. That is going to come in September. We've had 1 day of regional strike action to protest against it. We've got a programme of regional strike action in the autumn term and a national day of action in November. Like Paula said, I was on strike on the 27th of June. I've now gone back into my staff room, and my staff are saying, right, what's next? And I was saying, well, we're going out in November, there's regional action in October, September. And they're going, yeah, but what's next? Well, I've just told you, yeah, that's not enough. What's going to happen after that? And we haven't got a programme for what's going to happen after that. I'm running out of time. Okay, so what do we do now? We'll move on to what we should be doing now. And I think people have touched on this already. It's about bringing campaigns together. Like we said, there's 7 million people in trade unions, and if we look at our history, which is what I said at the start, if you look at the 80s, and before Thatcher finally was ousted, there was strike action. There was a lot of strike action in the 1980s. Obviously there was a miners' dispute, but teachers were also on strike action in the 1980s. That in itself didn't bring Thatcher down. But what it did was it gave confidence to the working class to take on the government in other issues. Hence, when poll tax came in and we saw the mass demonstrations and the fact that that finally did bring Thatcher down, people got that confidence because of the national strike action that had been happening in certain sectors in the 1980s. And we have to look at that and look at how we can build that now. So we're looking at the teachers being out on strike in the autumn term. Hopefully we're looking at other unions like CWU to take action over privatisation. Hopefully we can look at NHS workers taking action over what's happening to the NHS. But we have to coordinate that. PCS tried to do that. Some of the left in PCS tried to get PCS to come out on the 27th of June with the teachers. It didn't happen. So we have to push our leaders from below. So we want coordinated action because together we are stronger. But as has been mentioned before, we need to link into the other campaigns, and we need to talk to our communities. We need to link into the bedroom tax campaign. We need to link into the services that are being cut. We need to bring those people together, because at the end of the day, it's not just the trade union movement that is going to bring the government down, because it's not just the trade union movement that the government is out to kill. The government is out to smash the working class, and it's only as a working class that we can fight back and we can win.
Thank you, Deb. The last speaker on our panel has arrived, which is excellent. Billy Hayes, the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. So Billy, straight into it.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, thanks very much for, I've done a little bit of a wander around the building. Postman getting lost, lots of jokes there, of course. Well, the question is, how can unions win in Cameron Britain? And of course, the start and real answer is they can't. Because whatever the short-term success achieved in any particular sector, we still have this government in power. So we can defeat, and we believe we can still defeat, the government's coalition proposal on the privatisation of Royal Mail. But if we, at the CWU, were to defeat the coalition government on the privatisation of Royal Mail, we won't be able to restore the cuts in disability living allowance and the first week benefit of newly unemployed people. So if we look at things in a completely sectional way, and we consider winning under Cameron's Britain, of course, the fact that the very existence of the Cameron government is never a victory while they're in power. So really, I assume everybody in this room wants to remove the current government. Because I think one of the things that's kind of happens nowadays in terms of the struggle, it's so total, it's so widespread, that it's almost difficult to keep a track of this or that attack, whether that's a disability living allowance, whether that's a tax, whether it's a situation with regard to Syria or whatever. It's very, very difficult to almost keep track of the attacks that this government is launching on. Because central to the attack of this government, and I'll come on to some of the figures in terms of austerity, is about shrinking the role of the state. Shrinking the role of the state and never letting a bad experience to not provide an opportunity for the current Conservative-led coalition. So it's about shrinking the role of the state and the very idea of the state, the very idea of collectivism in social provision, whether that be, bus passes, whether that be healthcare, or whether that just be the idea of it. And the idea of the state itself, in terms of human history, is quite a relatively new idea, and that's why the rights idea is very old-fashioned idea. But it's a question: how can we? Everyone wants to remove the government, so the question is, how do we do that? But we also need to know, when we talk about austerity, and we're all in this together, it's only an austerity aimed at the poor and the working class. There's no cuts for the wealthy or the capitalist class. Real wages have declined since 2008, yet dividend payments to shareholders are a record level at £79 billion paid in 2012. So no austerity there for the people in receipt. So we can't just simply wait for a government to deliver us from the problems that we face. We have to defend our communities, defend our workplaces wherever we are. We've done that previously. We've done that as a union, the CWU, or UCW as then was, in 1994 under the Conservative government, the privatisation that was mooted by Heseltine. We've done it in 2007 under the Labour government, 2009, and it was even an instance of 2001. So we've been here before. It's a little bit like a Groundhog Day in terms of the problems we face under privatisation. Obviously under Major and under Blair, we led to a split under Blair, and more recently under Brown, because the last person to try privatisation under Labour was a guy called Lord Mandelson. And as everybody knows, he's one of the most powerful and influential people in politics, or so we're told by the, I think it's becoming a phrase already, by the posh people's politics. When you get just doing this job going around, and when you meet people, you don't see a lot of people that either look like you, or talk like you, or act like you. Even the accents, the cut glass accents of, you listen to Radio 4 or any of the radio stations, some regional accents, but by and large it represents a group of people that think basically, and in some ways they do run this country. But Mandelson was one of those people, or is one of those people regarded as powerful. And not that I pay attention to his biography, but if you get his biography, The Third Man, so I haven't really read it that much, but it's on page 192. He said this. He said the CWU used every political trick in the book to defeat the privatisation of Royal Mail. And that is a fine compliment indeed, coming from Lord Mandelson. But in defeating that bill, we had a coalition of people like the coalition that led some people like the chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party and so on and so on. We split them. And similarly, with this particular campaign, we're using people that we wouldn't necessarily find as our friends and allies, but we have to do this in order to make some kind of cross attack into the things like the Bow Group coming out, which is a right-wing think tank, which has come out to which has come out against privatisation this week. But much more importantly, of course, we've mobilised our members, and that is, in the workplace. And what we've done, we organised a ballot of our members. There's only 2 organisations in the country that kind of do ballots, whether that be for trade union elections or all sorts of other trade union types of elections, political fund and the like. We used an organisation called Popularis. We put out a ballot paper. We balloted our members on 4 things. One was on the question of some of the changes that are being imposed. They returned a 92% yes vote to support the union's position. 2 on boycott and mail, a 92% yes vote. On the question of privatisation, we got a 96% yes vote in support of the union's opposition to privatisation. And on the question of whether our members need a pay rise, we got a 99% yes vote on that, on a 74% turnout. So that's pretty good. We're still searching for that 1% of people who don't believe they deserve a pay rise. So the next phase of that now, we'll be holding an event on the 1st of August. We've already taken the decision for strike action. And there's a significant thing. Moya Green, who's the chief executive of Royal Mail, used to be the chief executive of Canada Post, kept Canada Post in the public sector to privatise Canada Rail. 3 days after that result, we received a letter offering a 3-year pay deal. Right, first year pay deal is 2.6%. Our people in post office counters, which is a separate entity now, still in the public sector, have received no pay rise and are forcing them to accept a change in the nature of post office counters. Now, if you're a postal worker, here's a question for you. You fill in a little box, 4 X's, right? Not a strike ballot, just a consultative ballot to judge the members' opinion on opposition to privatisation and pay rise. And you get a big yes vote, independently counted, 74% turnout. And all of a sudden you get offered a 3-year pay deal. I won't go into all the strings, I haven't got the time. What would you be thinking? Oh, well, that's it then. But I don't think that's what most postal workers will be thinking. I think it was Lenin that said, appetite increases with eating. If I was a postal worker, and I'm not now obviously a full-time officer, but a lot of my friends still are, I think, so we just pushed it up, cranked it up a bit, and we got a decent offer. No, not a decent offer, we got an offer of 2.6%. But you think some people these days would say, yes, we'll have to. I think what they think is, hang on, if we crank it up a little bit more, won't it improve the offer? And that's exactly the right analysis. Because I remember when they were privatising TV licence, which is now part of Capita. Capita, seems to be taking over the world wherever you go nowadays. In the run-up to that privatisation, that outsourcing privatisation, call it what you will, the people in that company got 35-hour week, this on the pay, that on the pay. And there's 2 aspects of this. One is, obviously, they're frightened, if you like, of there's been a reaction to that ballot. And secondly, they're worried about what the investors will think of that. There's been some reports in the Financial Times saying that investors are really worried. And this week, almost like on cue, there was a thing put out that investors aren't really scared about all the noise and the rest about the CW, who were talking about strike action ballot in September. They're not really worried. Now, whenever it's kind of like whistling in the dark, isn't it? The more the investors tell us they're not worried, and the more the bosses tell us that they are worried, it tells you that they're very, very worried, right? And I think, so where are we in this country? I think the point being is this. We have to rely on ourselves, and why I'm here today, I'm a member of the Labour Party, just about, at the moment this week. And I go back to this point, and the reason is this. We have to make alliances with people who are going to fight this rotten system.
Yep.
Now, we won't always agree on every single tactic, and we won't always agree on every the direction, I mean, you know, in terms of where we go. But I tell you what I always think, and it goes like this, and that even sometimes, you know, even this week, I was talking about John Speller, and I don't know how many people know John Speller, but John Speller used to be the kind of organiser mainstream in the electricians union. And you know, as right-wingers go, he's pretty right-wing, but he's a trade unionist. And they can, you know, even people like him can see this kind of attacking trade union. Now look, we're the second biggest organisation in this country, voluntary organisation, after the National Trust. And in the National Trust, in the National Trust you get to go into stately homes. Now we can't offer you that. Maybe one day we can offer you, we'll take over the stately homes. But that's a different thing. You see, so what we have to do is learn from each other's struggle, and I'm absolutely convinced we're going to deliver a resounding yes vote when we go to our members for strike action, because I think, you know, the thing is, all boats rise together, as somebody once said. Every struggle, no matter how small or big, whether it's fighting the EDL on the streets of East London, or whether it's opposing the war and intervention in Syria, every single movement by progressives, wherever they are, encourages every other progressive to fight more. Now, we can win this. We are, in some ways, we're the memory of the working class in this country. We're not defeated, and we don't intend to be. So thank you for asking me to turn up today.
My name's Pete Shaw. I'm an electrician, I work in construction, and I'm a member of the Joint Science National Rank and File Committee. Over the last couple of years, you've seen electricians and construction workers take on major companies, and historically, unbelievably, because construction is a really sick industry to work in. We lose one worker per day in the industry through accidents, 5,000 a year through diseases contracted within the industry. And for the industry to actually operate, it operates in a system which basically means that everyone is self-employed. You're employed through companies which when a major construction site starts, you're employed through agencies, and these agencies take 30 quid a week off your wage for administering your own wages. So when we took on the actual, the bosses 2.5 years ago in the Besley dispute, the electrical mechanical engineers, and won, this victory was unprecedented. And this is how we fight now in the future. We use tactics and things which we dreamt up at the spur of the moment during the dispute. And we blocked roads, we stopped traffic. In West Yorkshire, we went out to the power stations who were on different contracts to ourselves. We went to the oil refineries, we called them to assist us, and they did. And this shows that the working class in its all is still there and still available and will stand and fight. I'll just finish by saying this. We now have a very vibrant National Rank and File Committee. We have sections in Yorkshire, in Wales, in Scotland, and here in London. And we are still fighting. We're going to get Frank Morris reinstated, and that battle will carry on.
Sorry.
I knew it was a good move putting the red top on. I'm Jane Aitchison from PCS. I just want to ask you a question really, and that's about what Billy was saying. I think Billy's dead right. We're never going to win as unions under Cameron's Britain. But I have to say, those of us that were involved, and probably most people in this room were involved in the massive strike in November the 30th, 2011, want to repeat that and think that that's the way forward, and I think that's correct. But what would that do? That would sweep away these bastards if we were successful, as we hope that we would be, and replace them with what? Replace them with Labour. And I think that's a massive problem that we're now facing. Now, another big socialist meeting today up in Durham, Bob Crow's going to be saying that now is the time for an alternative to Labour. And that's what I want to ask the panel. I want to ask them what their view is of that today, please. Thank you.
My name's Matt Conley. I'm a member of Unite, and I want to make an appeal to this meeting, and hopefully people can take it out further, because it's been a bit of a theme at these kind of meetings about the need to rebuild the unions and going to organise the unorganisable and all this kind of stuff. I think the 29th of September, the demonstration outside the Tory Party conference to defend the National Health Service is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for every single one of us here to go into every single workplace, organised or unorganised, and say, get on the demonstration. If you're not in a union, here's a union form, sign up now. And what I think people are going to find is this, is actually a number of places where you think there's no union, there's people in the union. There's over there is a woman called Sarah. She works at Greg's. I was privileged to be invited by Ian and Ronnie to go to the Bakers Union conference. In Greg's, there are a layer of young shop stewards, not just in the bakeries, but also in the shops, in retail, where it's bloody hard, that are organising. And I think, it'd be great if Sarah came up and spoke about her experiences. Brilliant speaker, I've seen her speak at conference. That is happening in call centres as well, but actually we can start to encourage that. And also, Debs is absolutely right, the question of the National Health Service is a very, very political one now, because actually at conference there was a motion put up that was proposing that we do something about health tourism. Ian made one of the best speeches I ever heard against racism and against the, what he was saying, we import more nurses and doctors than we export. So all these are raising political questions. We can start to take these things on, we can start to build them all at the same time. So I appeal to everyone, that's how we start to rebuild and re-engage people in the fight against the Tories. Thanks.
Okay, the young woman at the front here. Yeah. Can the woman with the hand up at the back come down, please?
Hi, I'm Annette. I'm a journalist and socialist worker, and I've been following a story last week. 170 post workers walked out in Peterborough against a suspended delivery rep. Very happy to announce that the strike was a success. They're out for days and the delivery rep got his job back. On the paper, I follow the CWU as one of my unions. I love it. It's great. They're so militant that agitate out all the time, and I think that this autumn, with the as Billy was saying about the ballot, I think things are really going to start hotting up, and that's going to coincide around the time of the NHS, as Pat just said. Things are really going to get interesting, and I think the mistakes that have been learned since November the 30th and how we have to have coordinated action is more important than ever to start getting that in your branches and stuff and moving motions, as Pat was just saying. Because what we need, and I was in the Thatcher meeting, and I listened to Steve Hamill, who was a miner, and he said that solidarity is what wins, and I think we have to take that lesson forward. Thank you.
Okay. Over here, at the front page. No, the bloke sitting down there.
I thought it was a lady.
Sorry.
Simon Midgley, delivery rep in the delivery office and colleague of Billy. As Billy said, we've got a strike ballot coming up most probably in September, and it'll be the third national ballot national strike action that I've been involved in myself. Well, fourth, I think, actually. So counting is getting a bit difficult in the last 10 years or so. But it's also the third time we've been fighting privatisation in my working life, fighting the threat of privatisation. But I'm also a shop steward convener, a full-time shop steward convener effectively in the Royal Mail, and responsible for trying to organise 15 different workplaces and getting reps and union organisation in the delivery offices. And what I notice is that the only way you build in the workplace is by tackling issues in the workplace, right there and then at the cutting edge. You've got to involve people in the reason to fight back in the workplace and build the union. It's a constant renewal of the union going on, in my experience. And it's not on the basis of, we're going to sell you a service. Because if you don't provide the service, when you don't get that service, people resign. If they're going to sell out from a dispute, people just drift away, they get demoralised. But if they're actually involved in fighting for their interests, they fight back and try to prevent sales. But I just want to come back on two things actually. Well, I don't think, it should be obvious, I'm working in what is effectively a public service.
And I don't think we should be changing any strategy from concentration against attacks against public sector workers. But what I do think is crucial is we really do have a proper and honest debate about the impact of the last 30 years on the private sector. Because we're talking about, in 1979, 13 million union members. We've got now 6.5 million. There's around about 6 million people not in the organised working class. And most of those are in the private sector. We talk about union density. Across the country, it's 26% currently. But in the private sector, it's 14%. In the public sector, it's 56%. There's a difference. There's an impact of neoliberalism that has been felt in the private sector. So, in a workplace, in the public sector, 90% of people have a presence of a union in their workplace. In the private sector, it's 14%. Yeah? There's a difference. We have to recognise there's something's changed in the private sector. And my union is in a prime position. We've got traditionally organised workplaces like Royal Mail, where we've got 90% people in the union. We're also trying to organise in the places like Virgin, where they de-recognise trade unions, and we have to fight back from scratch. We recognise that we have to have a different strategy in the new industries, in the unorganised industries. It's not ditching the public sector, it's having a strategy for both the public and private, and we have to recognise we need both.
Okay, can you
just one very quick last question. I think obviously me and Billy have worked together alongside fighting various things and privatisation, as I said 3 times at least before. Well, not me personally, because the first time I wasn't even in the business, but certainly twice since then. This has been the 3rd time I've been involved in. But one of the things that does come across, we regularly have disagreements over politics, you can imagine that. But one question I have, Billy, is trying to build this coalition against privatisation, and he's a member of the Labour Party. But wouldn't it be brilliant to boost that coalition if Ed Miliband would say, in public, on television, we are opposed to privatisation of Royal Mail, and we will renationalise it if we get elected.
Okay.
Will he say that?
Hi, I'm Julia Simpkins, and I'm a member of the MUT up in the North West. Along with this, I was on strike, and when we had our conference in Easter, the left of our party did try and push to have whole country strikes rather than splitting up into areas, and we lost that fight, unfortunately. However, the strike that we had in the Northwest was a brilliant, absolutely brilliant day for those people who were in the Northwest. What seems to have happened in the rest of the country is that nobody knew it was happening. We did lots of work twinning with other areas of the country. We had people coming up from Warwick to Bolton, where I'm working. We were twinned with people in Dudley. We had all sorts of stuff going on, but generally, people out there did not know it was happening. And my concern about the series of regional strikes that we've got coming up is that people will not know that they're happening. One thing that people in my union back in Bolton have suggested is that when other areas are on strike over the next few months, that we go down to the wonderful media city that we now have up in Salford and stand outside with placards and banners and try and get the BBC to recognise that there is stuff going on in the country that other people need to know about. So my appeal to you is, when, not just for the teachers, but when stuff is happening, we need to really do all that we can now to get information out there to people.
Okay, thank you.
Can I set up? Yeah, thanks.
We've only got a few minutes left, so
My name's Ian Bradley. I'm a member of Newham SWP and also Unite Construction, and I was in the London Rank and File Committee during the Sparks campaign. And really, I ain't going to repeat too much of what Pete said, but what really we got out of that dispute, we've got a network all across the country that's now taking on blacklisting. You might have seen the Panorama programme a couple of weeks ago and see what's sort of been going on. But really, what got Unite really behind the blacklisting campaign is what we've done, that network really pushing them all the way. Now Unite have got 110 full-time officials working on blacklisting 7 days a week. You know, they're protesting in Madrid. Who says officials have an hard life? You know, going to Madrid all expensive pay. But really, it come out by us pushing, and also the fact that, you know, when one of our members was kicked off a Crossrail, we picking it out every day for 4 months. And the fact that when it comes to the recent Unite General Secretary elections, every construction branch nominated Jerry Hicks, and next thing you know, they want to spend a lot of money on, you know, the blacklist campaign. But really, it's also about, and this is how you like sort of, you know, but you've got to work with and against, you know. And so in the recent, we had the Blacklist Support Group annual AGM. Now normally we can't get anyone to speak to it. Now next thing you know, every general secretary in the country wants to speak at the AGM. You know, and Len McCluskey comes in, does his usual grandstanding, and we're going, fantastic then. Great that you're spending all this money on the blacklisting campaign, but what are you going to do about the officials that blacklisted our members? Are you going to kick them out? Are you going to take their pensions off them? If not, get out of the room. You know, and that's the thing, you've got to keep pushing all the things. But the thing is, and this is very quickly, our rank and file was born out of struggle, and we've got a bit of a problem because obviously there is a little bit of a lack of struggle. We've got to look, you know, the employers are on the offensive, and we've got a bit of an unconfident membership within the unions that don't necessarily want to push forward. But there is a militant minority, you know, you can see by the Jerry Hicks vote, you know, 36% that wanted to see more action for Len. You know, the NUT conference, 40% of people voting for national action. You know, the FBU and our balloting. For them, the lesson of the pension set-out was not one of like defeat, it was one of the fact that our leadership ain't good enough. And really what we've got to start is building these networks around the country that will work with the left officials when they want to fight, but act independently when they don't.
Thank you.
Greater Manchester against the bedroom tax. I'm not currently a union member, obviously because I'm unemployed and subjected to the bedroom tax and currently engaged in that campaign. I'm looking for people to come and say to me, come and join your union. I was in a meeting earlier on this morning where a woman got up and spoke and said that she'd been speaking to workers, female workers mostly, who were on, you know, really low wages and couldn't actually, and they're workers and wanted to join their union and couldn't actually afford to join their union. What is the matter with you actually, you know, and I'm talking to the union leadership here about getting some policy. Give those women free membership, you know, until they're sort of, you know, while we're fighting for increased pay and equality of pay. Give those women and those low paid workers free membership. And I want you to come out into the communities. I want you to come and knock on my neighbour's door who's probably never had a job in 10 years and say, we want you because we want you to come and support. I want you to go out and campaign and get working class people. You're talking about getting people together, fighting austerity and fighting the cuts. Well, they're affected by it too, in exactly the same way as I am. So I want the unions to come and support us in the bedroom tax, which I know you have done. You know, we've been on the marches and the demonstrations, and you funded my train fare to get down here today, and those kind of things, which is fantastic, and I thank you very much for it. But I want you to come and talk to other women in the community with children who can't afford to put shoes on their kids' feet and can't afford to do various things. So that's what I'm on. That's what this meeting is supposed to be about. How do we get rid of Cameron? Well, we get rid of Cameron by going and talking to the working class people on council estates where I live. I live on one of the biggest council estates in the country. And get people into the union. Get them involved. Anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do one last piece of
Hello, my name's Jamie. I'm in the Fire Brigades Union. A quick disclaimer is that what I'm about to say doesn't necessarily reflect any of the opinions of organisations I might be a member of. Just quickly, the questions about how do we win against Cameron Britain. But when Thatcher died, John Pilgers wrote an article and paraphrased it. He basically said that her greatest achievement wasn't in changing the opinions of one party, but that of two. And basically so it made it that when Labour got back into power, it was impossible for them to go back on what they stood for before. And we should remember that the political system isn't bent or broken, it's designed this way. And it won't matter who we vote for, they're puppets. The face might change, but the suit will remain the same. So I think that's just an important part of the question we need to remember. As far as like what can we do to win, we need to remember that the biggest lie that's being sold to workers at the minute is that they're not working class anymore and that they're middle class. You know, I did a session yesterday and I spoke about it there, and I just basically said that the media is constantly telling you that you're not working class anymore, so people don't have anything to identify with. So that's something that we need to challenge in workplaces. And a simple way I put it to people is, how long can you go without a paycheck? And that defines whether you're working class or not. Another thing would be that industrial action is a tool, but what about all the other elements that make up the fight? Martin Luther King talked about economic withdrawal and civil disobedience. And without those elements, strike action doesn't carry enough weight for me. His final speech at the mountaintop is referred to because of that famous statement that he made. But the rest of the speech was all about how we impose pain on corporations by withdrawing economically from them. And I would imagine that most people in this room have something to say about Rupert Murdoch, and you won't buy The Sun, and you probably don't buy into his newspapers, but how many of us in this room have a Sky subscription? It might be a small idea, but these things, you drop a pebble in the pond and you get the message spreads, doesn't it? So there's another element there, economic withdrawal.
Okay, I have to stop you there.
So just one more thing I just wanted to say. I would say that unions have been too insular and leadership hasn't done enough to support people. And there are a group of firefighters out there at the minute who are taken to the street to encourage the public to get behind them. And they've got a message, and it's we save people, not banks. And I would say that more unions and leadership need to get involved with actually telling the public what it is that they stand for and why they stand for them, to encourage the public to stand for us.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. Can I pick up 3 points? First of all, the question about what do we do about the level of union density in the private sector, which is very much a decline in manufacturing industry and loss of jobs in manufacturing. I think that is a very important question that the left needs to address, because it's obviously been used, you know, with governments now thinking, well, if we can get rid of unions in the public sector too, we've always got rid of unions. So that's a really important issue. The question of how do we get the general strike, how do we build towards a general strike, how do we rebuild the resistance which was building up around 30th of November 2011? Again, that's a very important question. A lot of unions, like my own, have passed resolutions in favour of it, and it'll obviously be a big debate, I hope, at the TUC this year. But there is a question of how we build it up, and how we, I think as part of that, build up local and regional sort of trade union networks which can build towards that through supporting each other's struggles. Jane raised, of course, the very big question about government. If we get rid of the Tories, what do you replace them with? And clearly you can't mobilise people if you're going to replace them with a bunch of people who are going to do exactly the same thing, and that's the problem we're addressing. On the other hand, we don't have a mass socialist party at the moment which is providing us with an electoral alternative. So, you know, when we come to the next general election, there's obviously going to be a debate on the left. Some people will argue for voting Labour on a socialist programme. The problem with that is it encourages illusions, they'll adopt it. I tend to like vote Labour with no illusions. Well, it's honest at least. You're not deceiving anyone if you say vote Labour with no illusions. That's the best you can do. Obviously, there will be some groups on the left standing their own candidates, and there are pros and cons of doing that depending on how it's likely to affect the outcome. So I live in the Sheffield Hallam constituency, interestingly. That's going to be quite interesting come the next general election, because that used to be at one time a Conservative parliamentary constituency. So a lot of people, including a lot of university lecturers and people like that in that constituency, for a long time voted Liberal Democrat to keep the Conservatives out. Those people, of course, felt rather foolish after the last general election, so a Labour candidate might do quite well in that constituency. I'm going to watch and see.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, obviously a couple of questions. One was about where would we stand on the issue of the Labour Party. I mean, you know, the problem you've got is can you build a momentum for a new political party in the next 2 years to get rid of the Tories? I know replacing the Tories is not the be all and end all if you're going to replace them with a light shade of blue. But the fact is, even the worst Labour government's better than the best ever Tory government. So, but I understand the argument and I understand the reasons why. we need to build a party that actually starts to represent the values of ordinary working class people. But I did say, you know, when I was speaking to you before, I mean, it was the trade unions that forced the Labour Party in 1945 to adopt the policies it adopted. And one of the ways it did it, because some people say the 1926 general strike failed, my argument is it didn't fail. It led to the 1945 Labour government. Because I believe that the actions that the trade unions took then, and the actions that the communities took then, brought the country together. And it said, never again we will allow people to take us for granted and exploit us. And I believe that's what the trade union movement and the communities need to do. They need to come together. They need to force a change of the political agenda, because it's not just the political parties we need to change, it's the political agenda in this country, from one that bases itself on wealth and big business to one that sets its sights firmly on making sure that the people are at the forefront of any political decision that takes part in this country. So that would be my answer on the issue of where I stand on a political party, maybe sitting on the fence a little. But on the issue of where we go and how we protect ourselves going forward, it is by working together. Whether we can offer free membership is another matter. We're only a small union, and General Secretary's sat there and he'll tell you we ain't got the money to fund ourselves on a daily basis. We haven't got the opportunity really to start giving away free membership. We'd love to. We'd love to have an organisation that involves bringing everybody in. But you know, I have another position on union membership too. My belief is this. You know, I don't want to be a trade union just that takes on members because we want to be big. I want to be part of a trade union that says that we deliver and we do it on the basis that we believe in what we believe in, and that our members know that when they join us, we're going to fight for them, we're going to stand up for them, and we're going to deliver for them, because that's what I believe trade unions do. And working with every other group in this country is part of that process that comes along with what we do with our members and with their support. Okay.
I came in first, but I don't get to speak last, but never mind. I know that trick. Well, let's just deal with the Labour question first. I'd say it's a very old question. You know, it's nearly 150 years old. We've been disaffiliated from the party. Well, and I agree, we're not going to form another party to the left of Labour in the next 2 years to 18 months. But so you know, I think that's, and you know, let's have a look at reality. In the Eastleigh by-election, the trade union socialist coalition got less votes than Elvis's Alive party. Now, you know, the facts are very stubborn things, and facts have to be confronted. So when I say about defeating under a coalition, you know, defeating, can we win under the coalition government? The fact of the matter is, sectionally, we may well do. But overall, it will still be a defeat, because after that attack, there'll be another attack. Now, the question is, well, you know, what will things be like under Labour? Well, I'll tell you what, if the Tories get in at the next election, the demoralisation that will permeate through the working class will be worse than it even is now. That is a stark reality. Now, much is made of, and one of the stars of the spirit of 1945 is here today, Simon Midgley, if I can see him. Simon was in there, and he talked about Royal Mail privatisation. Now, the thing about the spirit of 45, that very same government attacked the London bus workers, you know, attacked the dockers. So it's not as simple. It's more complicated than that. And the fact of the matter is, if you talk about trade union strength, right? Who enabled trade unions to grow? Ernest Bevin. Ernest Bevin brought the atomic bomb to this country without a cabinet decision. One of the most right-wing trade union leaders, nonetheless, ironically, he strengthened the role of the working class because of the role in the war. So I think it's much more complicated, and we're not dealing. And we've talked a lot here. Nobody's mentioned in this meeting today internationalism, right? Nobody's mentioned that, and it's absolutely crucial to the work that we do. Anyone got any idea how big Morocco is in population? Anyone? Say a figure.
20 million.
35 million people live in Morocco. Has anyone heard that Moroccan postal workers defeated privatisation in the last 2 months? Has anyone heard that postal workers in Tunisia defeated. So it's not just a history. We've dealt today about history, and a very dangerous thing to do, I think, too much of, our own history. We need to look internationally as well. You know, the trade union movement is the biggest social movement on the planet, 167 million. And yes, we need to draw on our history in terms of our struggles, but we also need to look international. Now, we can draw on one piece of history. Somebody mentioned about, I think it was Simon again, about private sector, public sector. What is the only programme on the telly at the moment about the world of work? Anyone? The Apprentice. And what is supposed to be the best part of The Apprentice? Where somebody gets the sack. Right? That's supposed to be the best part. When I was growing up, there was a programme on the telly called The Rag Trade. And here's the story arc for those that remember the rag trade. Management used to propose something, right? The workers would resist, and the leader of the workers was a woman called Paddy, right? And the management would propose something, and the workers would defeat the management. Now, why was that? And it was one of the most popular shows on telly because it reflected the fight in the workplace. So, you know, we want to work for a country where what happens in The Apprentice, before he says you're fired, they all meet and they say, well, listen, Alan. Right? We've had a meeting and we're not going down Tottenham Court Road selling these little bottles of water. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to replace you, take over the company, and we're going to work there. We're going to unionise this building. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, I can't wait for that. And that's precisely why I think that kind of vision of what trade unionism could be and should be does also precipitate discussion about what kind of political organisation will carry those kinds of arguments. And therefore I mean, personally, I do look forward to the day that we do have a organisation of socialist and left-wing radical thinking people together in one organisation independent of the Labour Party, because I do believe that organisation, led by Miliband and others, clearly is not going to deliver those things. I take absolutely all the points which Ian and others have said. Clearly the enemy is the Tories. It would be an absolute setback for the working class movement if the Tories won again, the demoralisation and so on and so on. So clearly that is the case. My feeling is how that will happen. Well, you know, my experience about how this potential new organisation, I don't think we can just draw it and suck it out of our thumb. I think it's something which will come about through the rise of struggle. I mean, you think about respect. I mean, whatever people think about respect or not, I personally thought was, at its time, a very successful attempt at doing that. It didn't last, unfortunately, it blew up, but you know, that's the nature of the left, they do these things, don't we, too often. But I do think, when you understand about the way that these things occurred, it's actually through the Stop the War movement, the mass movement like that, then it raised a whole debate about political representation. It's out of that came a new organisation. And I genuinely hope the People's Assembly, which was launched recently, the demonstrations, the strikes, and the movement which will develop around austerity, will then once again, hopefully, throw up that debate and discussion about what kind of political organisation we will need. So I personally hope people will come down to, we need an independent one of Labour, but that's a debate we need to have amongst ourselves and continue to have. Final point I think I do want to make is about how we build. You see, you know, when people talk about UCU and its role in the strikes and kicking them off, and it's true, I'm very proud that we were doing that, because we clearly didn't need more of them. In my union, at the moment, there's a lot of argument, and national union leadership, you have given up over the fight for privatisation. That's the truth of it. They think we can't fight nationally, what we've got to do is fight it out, college by college, side by side, university by university. And this is disaster. We cannot casework our way out of this crisis. It ain't going to happen. We can't fight this. You might win a battle at this hospital, you might win a battle at that university or that college, which we can. Those stronger sections can eke out a victory, a defence. But when the rest get defeated, they come back for you. And therefore there is no substitute. A local fight, local battle are no substitute for a national campaign. And that's something we do need to campaign, it seems to me. A national strategy around it. But the final word goes like this. You see, I mentioned this before many a time. I don't do that to sort of show my virility, my boastfulness about this. But I've been working 12 years in further education. And I've been on strike 14 times at those 12 years. Some, there are unofficial strikes, local strikes, national strikes, and so on. And therefore, and therefore, I think why I say this is because when you understand how we got made to be, how did we manage to get into a situation in the national union of influencing it and therefore calling national strikes over pensions and so on was because it was built upon those battles over contracts. We had a national loss in 1993. The irony, we lost national strategies, national negotiations, and therefore it forced us to work and fought at a local level to eke out battles and build strength up to local unions of all sorts of different issues. It is through that and further education that we've managed to build up our strength. So I'm not just alone here. I see somebody from Lambeth College, I see somebody from Croydon College, loads of places, not just myself, who've been on strike with many times, across further education. That's been our experience of actually striking. Through those battles at a local level that we managed to build up the strength of an organisation, which then had a left leadership which could call the national action which follows. No substitute for national action, but the two go hand in hand, and that's what we need to try to repeat, building up those networks. That's why the Unite Resistance Conference on 19th of October is going to be a parcel about how we generalise that experience and build those kind of combative workplace organisations.
Thank you. And our last speaker.
Okay, 3 points really. Firstly, the alternative to Labour. I think if you look at things like People's Assembly, what it does, it brings together people who want to fight. It brings together people who want to fight against what we've got at the moment and who are looking for an alternative. But what I would say is that any of these alternatives at the moment are reformist parties that are going to perpetuate a version of the current system, and that's why I am a member of the SWP and not a member of those other organisations. Second point, Gove has declared war on the teaching unions. He's been explicit. He said he is at war with the teaching unions. So we are sort of the test case, if you like. Performance-related pay is what they're bringing in September. We're taking strike action against that. If they manage to bring it in, well, they are going to bring it in September. It's happening already. But if they manage to defeat us in our campaign against it, I have no doubt it will be rolled out across the whole of the public sector where it isn't already. And I agree with what one of the speakers said before. You've got to get things right in your own workplace. If you can't solve disputes in your own workplace for your members, you're not going to win them to the broader arguments and the bigger battles that we've got going on. So there is an element of self-activity there. The anger is there amongst members, and they are looking for the leaders to lead us, okay? We haven't got the strength at the moment to act independently, apart from in a few disputes that we've heard about from the electricians and that. Certainly teachers at the moment are not confident enough to just walk out of school. They need the lead from the leadership, and it comes back to us again, pushing our leaders in the trade union movement to core programmes of national coordinated action. And what I want to see in the autumn term is not just the NUT and the NASUWT out on national action in November. What I want is a programme of coordinated action that closes every single school and college in the country, that shuts down transport networks across the country, that closes every benefit office, every employment centre, every public sector workplace, puts millions of workers on the streets. On its own, that isn't going to win. I'm well aware of that. But what it does do, it boosts our confidence. It shows that our side is strong, and it shows Gove and Cameron and the Condems that when we are together and when we are united, we are stronger and we can beat them.